Welcome everybody, this is the Yield Coach Show, Season 1, Episode 8. Every episode we bring you dynamic entrepreneurs, real estate investors, business leaders, inspirational guests ready to open up, share their story, the good, the bad, the ugly, so you can learn lessons, gain advantages, and accelerate your own success. I am your host, Ian Brown, joined today by our guest, Chris Walker. Chris Walker is the partner in charge at local law firm Lippis Mathias in Jacksonville, Florida. He specializes in real estate law, title and escrow, structured finance, private equity, and all real estate transactional matters. Chris has transacted, brace yourself, in $3 billion worth of real estate. I said $3 billion in transactions. Chris is also the local chair of the Jacksonville Housing Authority Board. We'll talk about that more later. He has broad knowledge of affordable housing and workforce housing matters. And Chris is also an investor himself. Chris has personally invested in hundreds of units. He currently holds a couple hundred multifamily units across the United States, as well as some commercial real estate. And his holdings are concentrated in affordable and workforce housing. Chris, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, my pleasure, man. How have you been? Good, I hope?
You know, I've been good. I think this is the time of year everybody's jealous of us Floridians. You know, life is good. I know we both have some little kids to enjoy, so busy, but certainly no complaints. But Chris, welcome on, man. If you could just, for the audience, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, happy to. First, thanks for having me. Appreciate it. This is awesome. My background, I've been in Florida here for about 8, going on 9 years. Originally from Western Pennsylvania, born and raised, a small town outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Went to law school at Penn State and met my wife. We then moved to Buffalo, New York for a few years, which is where I originally got connected with Lippis Mathias, the law firm I'm at. Eventually got smart, decided to get out of some of that winter up there, and moved down here to Florida. So I've really enjoyed being down here, opened up a Lippis office down here, and really got in, you know, at that point in time, about 5-6 years ago, really started getting into like that real estate world, that real estate investing. I've been doing real estate, you know, law for over a decade, but really started to get into, you know, the investing and things like that myself about 7-8 years ago. So, live in St. Augustine, Florida. Love it. It's, you know, I live in paradise. Wife, give a shout out to her. She is awesome. Takes care of everything for me. I wouldn't know how to run my life without her. 2 kids, Gus and Gloria. 2 dogs, which is too many. I love them, but it's a lot of dog.
That's awesome. So just to back up a little bit, Buffalo. So you're you know, I think as everybody hears this interview later, you've got a tempo and dare I say madness, but you're like a buzzsaw, and you and I have transacted together. I have a lot of respect for you, but I feel like you bring some of that Northeast tempo down to us slow moving folk in the South.
Yeah, I mean, I got to tell you, it was definitely, you know, growing up in the Northeast, right, and then working in a law firm, you know, first real job, you know, graduating law school, going to work for a law firm in New York, albeit Buffalo, but still New York. Very fast-paced environment, got to keep moving. Deadlines are, you know, always tomorrow morning, not, you know, 3 days later. And then you do come to the South, I joke, you go across the Mason-Dixon line, and it's that half-second hair slower, which for like the first 3 years I could not understand, man. I didn't get it. I didn't appreciate it. But people joke, they're like, you know, you may live here, but you still have that that northern, you know, 1,000 miles an hour. My team here calls me the Tasmanian Devil. So I just spin around, create a whirlwind, and we'll see where it lands.
So did you meet? Correct me if I'm wrong. Did you met your wife in Buffalo, and you guys migrated? Did you come straight to Jacksonville and St. Augustine, or did you land somewhere else?
No, we met in law school in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, which is Penn State School of Law. And, you know, she kind of put it on me. You know, she's from Buffalo, family's there. So ended up going to Buffalo for my first couple years of practice. And then literally, I can remember like it was yesterday, we woke up, you know, Thursday night, we go to bed, there was a sprinkle of snow. We wake up Friday morning, there's like 6 feet of snow, everything's canceled. And I'll never forget, I like looked at my wife after, you know, she, you know, asked me, air quotes, to go out and shovel out the driveway. And when I got in, I was having coffee. I'm like, I'm done. I'm out. We gotta we gotta go somewhere else. So I can remember like it was yesterday. We made the decision. Friday we were leaving. Saturday we picked the spot. Sunday we told our parents. Monday I gave my notice at the firm saying I'm out. So like in the span of like 4 days, we were leaving Buffalo, New York, and coming to Florida. So kind of a, you only get to do that like once in your life because, after you're sort of planning, it's like good luck doing that again.
Yeah. So I didn't realize that your wife is also an attorney.
She is. So she is she practiced law for as long as I have. Barred in New York, barred in Florida. She does more employment, general commercial matters. She's she's general counsel for her family's businesses, which includes Orville's Appliances in Western New York. So she takes care of all their legal matters, coordinates outside counsel as necessary, etc. So, and she's a full-time stay-at-home mom. So she's got like 3 jobs. She's got, general counsel work. She's got raising the children, and she's got raising me. So she's got 3 full-time jobs, which is not easy to do.
Yeah, I feel for you. My wife is also an attorney, and she's a litigator. And man, I do deals for a living. Kind of at my own pace. But she carries, I think she gets up to like over 100. Sometimes before she'd switch positions, she had like over 100 felony cases at once, and I'm like, I can't win. I cannot win an argument with this woman. And I'll be totally candid on the show, man. She's faster thinking than me. She's witty. She's clever. I just don't stand a chance. So I feel for both of us. There's no victories on the front.
Yeah, listen, it's they always say that the wife makes the man or the woman makes the man, and I'm sure that holds true for you as much as it does me, man.
I think it does. I don't think I've ever said it on the show, but I think if I never like kind of settled down, I was previously married, divorced, thought I was never going to remarry again, and certainly not have any more children. Obviously, I've remarried. I have 2 more children. I got a 1, a 3, and then of course Chloe's 16, and she's out there driving and scaring me. But I don't think I would have had like the focus to just go ahead and go into my like investment journey, think about a portfolio. Partly because kids and family force you to have a long view. You're not like some young buck only thinking about like tomorrow or the next day. You're like, look, I'm in this. I'm raising a family. I'm captaining this ship. So it kind of got me more focused on like 1, 3, 5, 10, 20 years. And it's a tip of the hat to our wives for keeping us grounded. So 10 years real estate law. When you were in, I know obviously law school, a lot of the curriculum you don't have any flexibility on, and then your 2nd and 3rd year you get some flexibility in your courses. Were you already concentrating in like real estate and finance or secured transactions, or did you just switch or find your footing afterwards?
No, when I was in law school, I had no idea what I was going to do. I took corporate classes, criminal law. I did family law clinic, and really just had no idea. It wasn't until I got into my first job where I was actually representing lenders, so banks, syndicated finance transactions, etc., that I really started to get a taste for the real estate, right? Because you see these guys on the lender side of the transaction, and you're hearing, your client is the bank, and they're talking about these deals, and you're hearing about all these deals, and that's really what started to spark my interest. It's like, oh, well, that's interesting. Oh, that's how the bank looks at that. Or we go over here, and the bank's thinking, oh, well, maybe that's not a great idea. So that's what really sparked my interest in real estate. I kind of fell into it more than anything else. And then really for the first 2 or 3 years, I did nothing but bank work, right? I didn't represent borrowers. I didn't put deals together. I was the guy preparing the loan documents, the credit agreements, the whatever else was out there that needed done. And that's really what I started to get an eye into real estate, which I think is backwards in some ways, right? Like I got to look at it from the financing side first before I really got to look at it from the buying, owning, and operating side. So it was a little bit backwards, but it's definitely a unique perspective. So did that for about 2 years, and then when I came to Florida, began working with some banks down here, but also got approached to start doing more owner-related work, right? And that's really where I started to really push in and do more of that owner side rep, and really start to decide to invest myself.
Interesting. We somewhat share in that. I was not doing the legal banking side, but before law school, I was doing appraisal work. and the appraisal work, obviously, this is before you had the AMC level between, well, commercially, you didn't have an AMC level between lender and appraiser. So we were directly engaged, putting out RFPs for lenders and I was doing mostly hotels and apartments and a little bit of all commercial. But like you, I was saying, what is the credit side, the banking side? Like, what are their pain points? And I think we both probably have had an advantage in our investing careers to date by having that inside look, starting on the credit and banking side. We know what they want and don't want. I know, like, unless you have a huge global cash flow or huge balance sheet, I know the deals that are probably going to work and not work. So now you said you were doing bank work right out of law school. Was that more of the foreclosure work? I know there was a lot of that work to be done, or was it different?
No, so I graduated law school in 2010 or 11, and so I was on the back end of kind of that downturn, right? So I was one of the few that when I came back to work, they were slow. People were just starting to hire again because they thought maybe the market was going to creep back up again from the real estate side. So I got to see it kind of from the ground up rebuilding too, right? From a finance, cash flow, economic perspective, it's like, okay, you look back and I look back and see the kind of deals that we were doing 10 years ago from credit underwriting and documentation and structuring. And fast forward today, it's two completely different things, right? Because you were coming out of one cyclical cycle, the bottom of a cyclical cycle, and now, arguably we're somewhere in the upper tiers of another cycle. It's two completely different ways of, looking at transactions, underwriting transactions, structuring, financing transactions. So it was really cool to kind of see that, to kind of get both sides of that. So,
And not to totally put you on the spot, and I have some thoughts on this. What are you saying differently from like when you got into the industry, of course, you were in the banking side, to today, where you represent lenders, but you're also doing a lot of like your own investing and representing
yeah.
capital and borrower groups. If you could give us any texture, kind of like on what, compare and contrast a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, comparing and contrasting, right? The first thing that's obvious is interest rate environments, right? It's two completely, even though Fed funds rates back then were probably as low as they are now, we're seeing rates tick up again. And, watching that rate environment and how it plays is kind of it plays into every investment, right? What's your rate if you're borrowing? What's your rate? Things like that. I'd say the other thing that I'm definitely seeing a big difference in is the level of sophistication in the structuring of deals, and those waterfalls for investors. Who gets what after what returns are made. They're getting more and more sophisticated, even more so than maybe they were 10, 15 years ago. And I think that's because you're seeing a lot more institutional money come into the real estate market. So 10, 12, 15 years ago, I would posit that there was probably 50 to 80% less institutional money in the game on some of the things that we talk about investing, maybe multifamily. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of money, but I bet you it was significantly less. Fast forward to today, look, they got good cash flows, right? They are quasi-recession proof. Multifamily and residential housing was the strongest performing market, even during the downturn from a rental perspective, real estate perspective. They're a depreciating asset, right? You can keep them on your books for a while. So you bring that all together, and now you got all this inflow and outflow of international money. You've got the worldwide political spectrum where people are trying to take their cash out of maybe a quasi destabilized country, bring it to the U.S. So there's a whole host of factors, right? But it's night and day, right? It's night and day from what was happening. It was night and day from what was happening 4 years ago, right? Let alone 10. So
I think that's a great answer. And just to jump in on one point of clarification, when Chris talks about depreciating assets, he's talking about the accounting principle of depreciation.
yep.
To the contrary, obviously real estate generally is an appreciating asset. So, but you can offset most of your income through that depreciation write-off. I just wanted to point that clarification out. One thing that I noticed, I got to appraise in a couple of years, a year and a half or so of like the go-go days. Now, what I did back then is, I was a young appraiser, so I mean, I had supervision, and I wasn't the one necessarily signing every report, but I did a lot of the field work, a lot of the interviews. I knew what loans were getting funded.
Yeah.
There were a lot of ground up non-recourse construction loans available, And I would go, and like I said, I did a lot of hotels and some apartments. I'd get to the site, and let's say it's a $40 million. I remember going, it was like a $40 million Hampton Inn on the ocean. I think it was in Myrtle Beach or
Yeah.
Virginia Beach. And I get there, and my property contact is already, we've already made one big round of funding on the construction. He's already pulling up in his like brand new curvy Mercedes, and the whole thing's non-recourse, 90% LTV, and they weren't going to. I mean, these deals weren't getting held anyways. They'd get them up, they'd get them out of the ground, they'd get them to CO, the certificate of occupancy, and they would sell that thing on like an architectural rendering. And as soon as it got CO'd, the deal would fund. And so nobody there was it was easy to take big risks. Well, easier because you got this non-recourse debt, and you're going to sell the project before it's probably even really completed. And so it was fairly reckless lending back then. Where fast forward now, it's there's a lot of money in the marketplace, but it's not as easy as it used to be. I mean, I feel like the underwriting has ratcheted up, and I'd be curious if we do slide. I think we're good. I think we're good for the foreseeable future, at least in Florida. We just have so much population growth down here, but I think if we do have a slide where there's foreclosures again, especially on like income producing properties, I would be curious to see if the banks would take the properties back or be more open to workouts. Because one fundamental thing that spanked a lot of lenders in the last cycle is they took back a lot of real estate, and then ended up they're not designed to hold real estate as banks. They end up selling it at deep
Yeah.
discounts, 20, 30, 40, 50 cents on the dollar. I don't personally think broad scale, even if we slid, I don't think the banks would be like that. I think they'd be more inclined to do workout.
Yeah, I think that's true, except for maybe two circumstances, right? I don't think, look, banks are not in the business of owning properties, right? They're in the business of lending money, collecting deposits, and returning dividends to investors. It's hard for them to take back a property and then hope they get out whole or make money on it. So I'm a firm believer, like, I don't think banks want to own properties per se. I think if you do some bridge loans, depending on the terms, there's like those quote unquote loan to own programs, right? Where the sharp edges are so sharp that you'll never get out of it, which is a whole different conversation. But I don't think banks want to own the properties except maybe in two circumstances, right? One, where they make a loan, it's a little aggressive. Even in this market, there's some banks that will still be a little bit aggressive, right? And at the end of the day, it doesn't work out, and the borrower is just a nightmare to deal with. What do I mean? Doesn't want to talk, doesn't want a solution, screw you, I'm not doing anything, just take it, right? Throw back the keys, right? That's always the non-recourse. I'm just going to throw the keys back. I think that's where banks get, quite frankly, upset. And they're like, look, we loaned you the money. We all know deals can go south. We all know markets can change, right? But I think where banks get really upset, it's like, you're just going to throw the keys back at us? Like, that's not a partnership. That's not what we agreed to, right? So I think that's number one, communicating with the bank, being willing to work with them if something does go wrong. And then two, the other thing is you mentioned the rolling up in the Mercedes and stuff like that, right? Whether people want to admit it or not, perception is reality, right? So if you roll up into a Mercedes on a project that's, $1.5 million under budget, okay, and the bank's there, and you're going, yeah, I can't finish it, and there's got to be a little bit of humility there, right? Like, you can't be saying to the bank, I have no money, I have no cash, and you're rolling up in a $150,000, car. Like, you got to use some common sense there. And I'm not saying you deceive the bank. I'm just saying, look, be prepared for the conversation. When the bank's like, so wait a minute, you can't fund this, but you're driving around a $100,000 car, you want a loan on another property, and you want me to help you build your house? Like, what the hell? I think those are the 2 points, right? That banks don't want to own properties. Even when I represent banks in foreclosure matters, we're always trying to figure out a way to save the property, to save the project, restructure it somehow, versus we're taking it, right? That really becomes a last resort for them. So,
I think that's a good observation. And you are doing some deals that are higher level than probably a lot of the audience is thinking of. A lot of the audience might be thinking of like, small multifamily, regional apartments. Because I mean, you're operating on a high. I mean, with 3 billion transacted, you've seen like the true nuances of this like high level lending. I know like the debt funds and the non-recourse large bridge loans. What's interesting, and I doubt everybody knows this, from what I understand, about $10 million is kind of, I mean, if you go online and Google like debt funds or bridge loans for multifamily non-recourse, you'll see people that say 3 to 5 million. Like, but from what I'm hearing, the good money is really 10 million and up, and
Yeah.
you're almost incentivized to borrow the big funds and do the big turns. Would you agree?
Well, when you think about it, right? Like just think about it, just from our perspective, just from a lawyer perspective, right? Or even from a borrower's perspective. Whether you borrow 3 million, 5 million, or 10 million, you still have the same you do the same diligence, the same documents, the same everything. So it's like, yeah, for better or worse, they want to put out bigger checks, right? More money out, more money deployed, better yields on their funds versus, some smaller loans. But that said, just thinking through, I mean, I've seen guys get bridge loans for $250, $300, $500,000, right? And you just got to know where to look, right? And you got to understand what you're getting into. Like those are the ones where, remember, I talked about the loan to own, the sharp edges, right? They're going to lend you the money and hope that you screw up. You just got to understand what that means, right? If you stay in the box, you'll be just fine. If you try and push yourself outside the box, buyer beware. So.
And I think that again, just more for like the audience, to understand the loans that Chris is talking about. These might be like a bridge loan. Think of a bridge as being like a fix and flip loan. If you were to do an analogy on like a single family home. So you do this fix and flip loan into, let's say, like 100 unit or 200 unit apartment complex. This is where the lending actually can become non-recourse. It's where you might have better terms, and by terms I mean lower rates. Where if somebody calls me and they're like, "Hey, yield coach, let's do a triplex." Well, we're probably, if we want to buy, rehab, and sell, or buy, rehab, do the full burr, we're probably signing personal guarantees. Our rates are
Yeah.
likely higher. Like I'm going to bridge in on a triplex like at 7.5% private money, whereas like Chris could probably find his clients like, I don't know, 3% money non-recourse to do a $10 million bridge. So
Yeah.
it's contrary to what a lot of people would.
Yeah, and I think too on those smaller loans, like not small. I mean, look, it's a lot of money. Don't make no mistake. But on those smaller bridge loans like you're talking about, or those smaller loans, let's say for a triplex, right? Those triplex loans actually get really interesting in the sense that, okay, maybe you're only financing a triplex, but are you financing the cash flow out of it? Are you financing the real estate out of it? So there's some cool things too that you can look at. Banks look at all that, right? There's now lenders out there that are focused less on the physical asset and more on cash flow. So maybe they're a little bit, they're willing to go above an 80% loan to value because they like the cash flow piece. So I think, again, more money coming in, more creative ideas, more opportunities. So they exist. I'm seeing that come down, to the triplex, the quads, the 5, 7, 10 unit properties. I think it's going to take a little bit more time to really see funds focus on this, but it's coming. It's happening. They're pushing into these markets.
I see more advertising, whether it's like social media or email campaigns that I receive. It used to be like your 1 to 4 unit loan programs, whether it's just like buying a quad for a rental or doing like a fix and flip loan. The same lenders were all in the 1 to 4 space, and you had to have the global cash flow to do it. And well, now what I'm seeing is I'm getting a lot of ads for 1 to 20 units, which is interesting because 4 was always the cap, because that, as we both know, that's a lending threshold too. But now I'm seeing 1 to 20 units.
I agree.
They're not looking for personal income. They're looking for like debt coverage, and so they're, to your point, they're taking kind of like the more sophisticated analytics of the larger apartment deals and like distilling it down to like you said, maybe a triplex, and they're like, what's the debt coverage ratio? What would be like maybe not a full blown like 5 year cash flow with IRR, but a little less concerned about the borrower, more concerned about the cash flow. And from what I see, you're still keeping the personal guarantees in there, but I think that's just the nature of smaller lending.
Yeah, I agree. One of the first loans I did, about 5, 6 years ago, was one of these. I found somebody that I was, real estate investors, right? Heavy on assets, our liquidity stinks, right? There's never enough cash. But I had a deal. It was a great cash flowing deal, but it was in an area that was still up and coming. So if you looked at it purely from an LTV perspective, loan to value, right? It wouldn't, it maxing out, let's say I could get, $100,000 out of it. But if you looked at it from a cash flow perspective, I could get $160, $170 out of it. So finally found a small lender that looked at it with me and said, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, the LTV is a little bit out of whack, but we'll make a credit exception because the cash flow is so strong. So I think especially for your investors and people listening to this, it's like this goes back to you got to know your numbers, right? You got to be able to tell the story to people that you're working with to make sure they understand it in a clear fashion. Like, yes, I know that XYZ doesn't fit in the box, but here's why it's mitigated. Here's why it doesn't matter. Here's how I can protect against it. So I think those are some basic principles that even I forget sometimes. I get so excited about a deal and the metrics, I forget to slow down and explain the story to a third party that I want to work with because they don't know. They're coming into a deal fresh. They don't have the eyes for the deal.
And just to follow up on that for some examples, like I'll look at deals sometimes where the cash flow is very good. So, just to speak very plainly, high revenue, reasonable to low expenses, great net cash flow to then apply to whatever your debt service terms are. Sometimes there's just not a lot of real estate. So from like the physical plant analytics, lenders are going to get scared. Let me give you a super specific example. Maybe you got a property that doesn't have a lot of square footage, but it has tremendous revenue, like Airbnbs at the beach. I'm looking at a property, Chris is aware of it, 4 units. The whole building is only 2,000 square feet. So you're like, okay, 2,000 square feet. Do we have comps like at $400 or $500 a foot? Because if you want an after renovation value of $1 million, show me a quad that sold for $500 a foot. And maybe at this moment that sale doesn't exist, but there's a lot of investment people that would say, look, this thing is going to do 15,000 a month in revenue. You're going to operate it for 35, 45% expense ratio. You're going to have a debt coverage ratio like over 2. So to Chris's point, and kind of what I'm harping on is sometimes when you're used to underwriting a deal just on like the cash flow, it could look really good. And it really could be good. But you go to like a lender, a real estate lender, and they're going to say, there's just not a lot of real estate here. Another example would be boat yards, like boat and RV yards. So that it's really just stabilized land with a fence. So from a banking perspective, like I could go, I'm looking at one right now. I won't give you the address because I don't want you to snake it, but
Come on.
We're looking, let's say I'm looking at a 5-acre site with a partner, and I'm not going to say too much, but it's going to be about $1.2 million to $1.5 million to take the 5 acres from what it total, like it should be about, let's call it $1.5 million project. Well, this thing's going to have, like, if you run a cash flow on it, you can park like 250 items on it. It's going to do like 30,000 a month in revenue, operating expense. You're going to run this thing for like 20-30%. So it's going to scream off cash flow. But when you go to a bank and you say, look, I want to borrow, say $1.2 million on 5 acres. I'm like, well, what's on it? Well, like some rocks, a fence. There's not a lot of real estate there. So it's got an incredible cash flow. So an investor could do, like a 3 times debt coverage or better, but a bank might say, I'm not so sure. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, and just kind of just putting some wrapping thoughts on it, right? Like getting people to understand that cash flow is huge, and then also getting your lenders, if it's a bank, this is important to your lenders, getting them to understand like, hey, the cash is going to be sitting in your account, right? It's not like I'm going to like take this money and put it in another bank and you'll never know what's happening, right? It's going to sit there in your account. So I think that makes people feel better. But yeah, look, the intrinsic value of that cash flow, I think investors have come around to realize, like, look, real estate, generally speaking, is a relatively safe long-term investment, right? You can't make more dirt, right? It's just, well, I guess you could, but you can't buy any more dirt than what's here today. It's just, it's a diminishing asset. So, even if it's just the dirt, it's certainly valuable, but people are realizing that dirt now is just, it used to be like that was the value, right? The dirt was the dirt, that was the value. But now I think people are really starting to price in that cash flow and realize that cash flow is on top of that value, that dirt. So,
yep. Yeah, okay. And I think we've tackled this issue really well. The last little comment I would make is bear in mind, if you are like a top tier 1% operator and you just kick ass, you're like the best boatyard owner, you're the best Airbnb owner, the best hotelier. Don't expect to be able to go to a bank and get a credit decision that reflects you are top 1%. They have to assume like just quote unquote prudent medium operations. So I have met lenders that are like, look at my portfolio, it's banging at these numbers. I can't get loans based on what I'm doing. What's going on? You have to assume if you die or leave the property or get foreclosed, the lender has to assume they can bolt on third party management and get the same projection. So that was just one last thing I picked up from my appraisal. Just to pivot a little bit, you've got a unique experience. You sit as the chair of the Jacksonville Housing Authority, and I don't know if we'll have many guests that can speak to kind of what the Housing Authority is and just the overall topic of affordable housing and vouchers. Give us kind of like an overview of what that position is, what the Housing Authority does. Are there housing authorities in every city? Just kind of talk us through some of that.
Yeah. So housing authorities are, for the most part, independent agencies in various cities across the United States. And housing authorities are used to to deploy federal housing and urban development dollars. So think project-based vouchers, right? So when I say project, what I mean is, unlike a Section 8 voucher where it can go between property to property with the tenant, a project voucher stays at the project, so it just pays for the project. So you see more, we have what's called public housing, which is sort of like project housing at the Housing Authority. And, they help what are considered to be low income, extremely low income. And what that means is that's a HUD published definition, housing and urban development definition of what that means. And so, at the Housing Authority, what we're focused on is, public housing for those that are in what's called the extremely low income brackets and low income, very low income brackets. But also looking at affordable housing, and something I think housing authorities should be looking at is workforce housing, right? Because, look, as an investor, my goal is to push rents as far as I can to increase my, gross, rental income, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that the tenants that are living there can actually afford to pay that. So in some senses, the housing authority is there to kind of figure out ways to help make it affordable while not necessarily, crushing an investor's return, at least in my estimation. So housing authority, great. I do serve. I'm chair of the Jacksonville Housing Authority. There are housing authorities in most major cities across the United States. Like I mentioned, they're really focused on that public housing aspect. But what it's done for me as an investor is really begin to understand, hey, let's say I'm a big multifamily investor, right? I like multifamilies. I like anything from a single family home the whole way up to, large unit complexes. I think they're a great value if you can find the right one. But what I really appreciate about kind of my background in affordable housing, and now I see firsthand with JHA, is that kind of product. If real estate as a whole, if multifamily as a whole is quasi-insulated from a potential recession, because everyone's got to pay their rent to be able to live somewhere, right? If real estate multifamily is insulated to a degree, I think workforce housing and affordable housing are even more insulated, because when you think about it, let's say that you're a young white collar worker, just got out of college, great job, you go get that $1,600 a month apartment, first real apartment, gorgeous, and then there's a downturn, heaven forbid your salary gets cut, or even worse, you get terminated, right? What are you going to do, right? You're not going to stay in that $1,600 a month unit. You're going to try and find something that's maybe $1,200 or $1,000 or $900. You got to make ends meet, right? So that's what I like about the affordable housing and the workforce housing, is the sense that I don't necessarily think that an economic downturn or a change in macroeconomics will that adversely affect these two specific classes of housing within the larger rental housing market. So, and if anything, the housing authority, I think, and the data that we talk about and the situation we talk about, which I'm a big believer in affordable housing, I think there's a need for private developers, private investors like us there's a social responsibility that I think we have. Even though we're maximizing our returns, I think there's a social responsibility that we've got to make sure we contribute back to some of that, to help those less fortunate, to make sure we can be a part of the solution, not part of just the problem. But the housing authorities really shed some light on that. Just real quick, you got me on a soapbox now, Ian. Real quick, the Jacksonville Housing Authority has over 70,000 distinct applications on our affordable housing or public housing wait list. Assuming 2 to 2.5 people per family, because those are applications, that's over 150,000 individuals in Duval County, Jacksonville, Florida, that are looking for some sort of affordable or public housing. It's a lot of people, right? It's a lot of people. And my point is that in my mind, that means you could add 60 to 70,000 new units in Jacksonville, and if they were priced appropriately and marketed appropriately, you could fill them up overnight. Those people exist. Those people need that housing. So that's my soapbox on JHA.
No, thank you, Chris. Now, I'll say a couple of things, and you just tell me if and where I go wrong. I feel like there is, like, the trend is better funding for the housing authority. I guess I can only speak more locally. Better funding, more vouchers. When I say vouchers, like Section 8 and HUD, and these are, I'm going to paraphrase, these are not the project vouchers. These are the tenant-specific vouchers. And
Yep.
correct me if I'm wrong, there are thousands more of those coming into the marketplace, if you want to call it the marketplace, but to where tenants can go to. Individual landlords offer a voucher and then get paid by the housing authority.
That's right. So, individual landlords can sign up to become part of a landlord program, and it works differently in different jurisdictions. So, I'm talking Jacksonville, and generally speaking, it might be different in Tampa or, Charlotte or Atlanta or wherever, right? But generally speaking, you go into the housing authority, and if you can market to their tenants, sign up to put your place on their site or as an available unit. If a tenant's interested, they'll come out and they'll do an inspection of the unit so that they can confirm that it's, decent, safe, affordable. You got to make sure the voucher amount works, or there might be a copay component. So some vouchers aren't for the full rent, right? Some vouchers are only for 30% of the rent. The tenant's responsible for the balance. And then, you take part in the landlord training programs to make sure you understand what you got to do. You keep in communication. So yeah, it's out there, right? Those are out there. And quite frankly, when you think about it, some people are like, Section 8 tenants, I don't know, hard to deal with. Maybe it's a little bit too much. Think about it from just an investment standpoint, right? It's like, it's pretty hard to argue with a guaranteed check from the government every month. There's maybe I'm not getting the highest rent, but hot darn, there is some serious value to knowing that Uncle Sam is cutting that check every month. So
I totally agree. And just on one of my own investments, I had it was two particular. I had a 28 unit and an 8, and they were a couple miles apart. They were independent properties, but we got to where, from a asset management perspective, we wanted to have about half of our tenants. We would have done more if we could do it, but we wanted to have about half of our tenants, because they were in lower income areas, on these vouchers that Chris is talking about from the housing authority.
Yeah.
And I will say there were some, especially when, typically like in the cold months around the holidays, when tenants might be more inclined to miss rent. There were times when our rent roll, like, you look at your payment schedule, like on the 5th, 6th, 7th of the month, the only money we had collected so far at that point was the housing authority tenants. So
yeah,
they can really insulate your cash flow. And I'll just speak personally. I'm sure some landlords might have possibly some horror stories, but the housing authority tenants, I think I had, let's say, 14 to 18 housing authority tenants when I owned these properties. For the most part, they were great, because, and Chris might be able to speak to this, when I say great, if they break rules, damage property, they run the risk of losing the voucher. I mean, the voucher is it's like a housing food stamp to parallel. You don't want to lose it. It has a great monetary benefit. So they tend to have better behavior than some of the market rate low income tenants.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I'll say this, look, I don't care if it's low income workforce or, class A assets, right? You're always going to have one or two bad apples that, break things, do dumb things, break the lease terms, loud, obnoxious. It's just, just the world we live in, right? But I agree with you. I think a lot of these tenants that are on these vouchers, they they really appreciate that they have this, because they can't make ends meet otherwise. And I think they do. To them, it's the functional equivalent of dollars in their pocket, right? Because otherwise they can't afford this. So I think you're right. I think they're very respectful. And look, at the end of the day, whether you have a voucher or you don't have a voucher, I mean, this is why tenant screening in my, I'm a big fan of tenant screening. Believe it or not, I don't. Credit's important. I'm less worried about credit than I am worried about some of the other ancillary things. Because look, at the end of the day, you got to screen your tenants, right? You got to know who's living there. You got to know what their background is. You got to know what's going on. And you just got to be diligent about that process. And I think that's the big thing, right? Like the vouchers are great, the income's great, but you still have to do your diligence. So.
And you might have a little trick up your sleeve, but my favorite screening procedure for multifamily rental management is the one that takes just a little more effort, and that would be calling the last couple landlords, because landlords are not likely going to lie in anybody's favor. And if any, and so you could, the easy low hanging fruit is to pay for the third party service. You get a nice dashboard report. Here's their credit. Here's their employment, blah, blah, blah. And that's all good. And you can do the criminal history search. But, and I'm not saying you shouldn't do those things, but calling the last landlord or two, I've never, and I'll knock on wood, I've never had an issue with a tenant that I spoke to the trailing couple landlords. If they had good reports from the last couple landlords, that to me was like the best indication of how they were going to be for me, assuming they have a job where they can cover the rent by whatever multiple you require.
Yeah, I do the same thing. And then, so where they can, some don't want to give it or say, I don't have somebody. So I try to get it where we can. The other thing that I like to do is I say, listen, I want 2 or 3 references that aren't family. And I want to be able to call your current employer just to verify income and verify stability. Some tenants, when they tell me I don't feel comfortable with you calling your employer, boom, red flag. I'm not saying that you discriminate. I'm not saying you do anything like that, but it makes me pause and go, okay, I need to ask more questions before I make a decision. Like, are you going to be out of work? Are you aware you're being laid off? Like, what's going on, right? So I think you're right. Taking that extra beat to maybe ask that one more question can save you a lot of headache, 6-8 months down the road.
And I think the last thing I'll point out, especially with some of these more challenging properties, how many people are going to be in the unit? Is it grandma on the lease, and then you've got like 7 other people in there that aren't on the lease, and it becomes an enforcement challenge? Oh, you can't talk to me that way. I'm not even your tenant. Well, you're here all the time, and we have these rules about where you park, how long you can be here. Are you a guest? Are you family? And so I got a little bit better over the years. Now, I don't personally manage my own property anymore, but even just asset managing the managers, watching for how many people are on the lease and how many people are really living there. You can't discriminate legally against families, but you don't want to have somebody with like 5 unrelated teenage minors, running around with that aren't on leases if you can avoid it legally.
So like to one, a horror story, right? And this was terrible, and praise be that ultimately everybody turned out okay. But we had not on one of mine, just one of my clients, and they called me and just were freaking out. They had a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, if memory serves, 2-bedroom, 2-bath. This was out west, and was rented to a couple. Couple apparently had people like staying with them for long term, right? They had a 2nd-story deck, and they had like 8 or 10 people, 9, 10 people on the deck, and the deck gave way, right? And, fell down a story, horrible injuries, the whole 9 yards. Deck had been maintained, was in good shape. They had evidence of all this, which goes to making sure you inspect your properties regularly to make sure you have records showing that you're doing your upkeep. But, look, at the end of the day, when push came to shove, what they come to find out is like, this wasn't the first time they had been on this deck like this, right? They had like 6 people, 7 people living in a 2-bedroom, 2-bath apartment, and that's no good, right? That's no good from a health perspective. That's no good from a rent perspective. That's no good for anything. So one of the things I do myself, much like you, I don't personally manage my assets. I engage people, but even when I was doing it, what I did was I made a point every single quarter I went and looked and had an inspection of my assets, right? Because it's pretty hard. Look, if they get away with it for 3 months, okay, shame on you guys. But if I don't check it and I don't look and I'm not paying attention for a year, 18, 24 months, shame on me, right? You gotta, people love what they call the mailbox money, right? The check just shows up. It just shows up. But that doesn't mean you should stop looking and working your assets. It's a job, right? I mean, this is a job. And when I first got started, I'm sure you were the same way, Ian, which is, we had other jobs too, right? I think you said some of your listeners are, kind of just looking to get into real estate and have other careers, right? I mean, make no mistake. I mean, this becomes a second job. You got to work, and it can be a grind at times. But long term, I think it's worth it. It's a great asset class, provides that mailbox money, and honestly, it's fun.
It is, and it's been life changing for me. I don't know how I would have ever repositioned myself personally without investment real estate. So I don't know that there's another path. I'll say for the common man, and when I say common, like you could have kind of like a vanilla 5 out of 10 skill set, and with a little bit of street smarts and common sense can go a long ways. And in real estate, there's no special licensure to be an investor. There's no special license that says I'm an investor, I'm a developer. Now, many developers have other licenses, but you don't have to. So, anyways, it's there are very high income professions. You could be a surgeon, you could be a lot of things. But as far as something you could listen to podcasts, read books, study, partner up. I mean, I believe that real estate is the best path for most people to create wealth.
Yeah, I mean, even if you look at some of the major corporations, right? Major wealthy corporations, they have significant pieces, usually of real estate, or even if the corporations don't, miraculously, the major shareholders have major pieces of real estate. I mean, it's a major portion of the wealth in the United States. There's one other thing you mentioned that I thought I'd bring up. You said, like, really want to get into this, reading and podcasts and everything else. You mentioned partnerships and co-investments, right? Love that. When I first started getting into this, I did not go, hey, I'm going to throw dollars at this and hope it works out, right? I went and found, some mentors and some people that I thought did this, a good way. And I said, hey, look, can I invest some dollars with you? Maybe it's $1,000, maybe it's $2,000. I'll do some sweat equity. I'll do, what can I do to help? But I really want to learn, right? If you can find somebody like that, that is, leaps and bounds. You can read and listen all you want, but you got to really get in there and be part of something. And, look, God bless the folks that dive in head first with no experience. I mean, can it be done? Yeah, it can. I've seen the success stories of people doing that. But really, you gotta be willing to humble yourself a little and go, hey, maybe I need to co-invest along with somebody, or maybe I just need to be a passive investor on a small deal and just watch how it works, right? I think that's a huge part of getting into the industry and quite frankly, thriving in the industry. I mean, there's deals that I do where I am nothing more than a passive investor. I just hand cash over to a sponsor and I sit back and watch. Why? Because I want to know, I want to understand, what are they doing? Give me some insight. That's a great way to expand your knowledge base.
I'm going to wave the white mini legal pad after that so Sammy, our producer, knows. Grab that nugget, chop it up, because that was hot fire. That was hot fire, Mr. Walker. I could not agree more. And I think I just did a little bit of whiteboarding on this. I think for a lot of people, I think you and I were, let's say, I don't have to age us too bad. We're late 30s, early 40s, kind of bracketing 40. A lot of people by this time in your lives, you might be married, have children, and you might be completely intimidated or just like, it's just not going to work. You are not going to be able to just jump out and become a full-time real estate investor. A really good way to learn is just like Chris said, co-invest or invest passively. And we can get into more details, but if you are a limited partner in a larger deal, you cannot lose more than what you put in. Don't put in like your last 10, 20, 30, 50,000. But if you put your money in and the deal doesn't go well, yes, you could lose your money. However, you are not personally signing guarantees on the larger loan. So if you find somebody that allows you to invest passively with them, that's experienced, hey, they should not be losing your money. They should be making you money. And really, most importantly, if your money's in there, you're going to pay attention. If you find a good operator that will share the P&L, the rent roll, like kind of the high-level asset management discussions and educate you along the way. Here's our budget. Here's our pro forma. Here's why we're doing these types of turns and spending this amount of money in marketing in these locations and websites. You will learn so much faster by rolling up your sleeves, even as a passive investor or co-investor, like Chris said, and just jumping into a deal.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Well, Chris, I feel like I could go forever on the housing authority discussion, but we tackled it pretty well. One thing, I never had a project-based, I don't know if you still call them vouchers, but I never had the project level. I always had the individual tenant vouchers. And one thing I would point out for the audience, and Chris did say it, but I just want to highlight it. If you hear this episode and you're ready to run into lower income neighborhoods, because let's be honest, the acquisition price is lower, the price per foot is lower, the rehab is often cheaper. Bear in mind those vouchers, they can be revoked. I mean, you could have bad behavior, they could lose their voucher. Also, this happened to me. I wouldn't call it a horror story, but it was a concern. I had, let's say, 15 vouchers going on, they can get reset during the voucher period. So let's say I sign with a tenant, they have a voucher for $750 with no
Yeah.
contribution from the tenant. It's a full voucher. Let's say that tenant has a change in status or employment. I get a notice, usually via email or an old school letter, that the tenant is now responsible for 400 and the housing authority is going to pay me 350. I think that math works. And I can't do anything about it. The challenge is this may be a tenant that I now have to chase for 400 when I thought I was getting all 750 from the housing authority. That's just one frustration is a change even during your lease period. It's kind of out of your control if there's a change with the tenant status.
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing I'll say about even Section 8 vouchers is those spot inspections, right? They can get down to and how would you know, right? A tenant, moving something around puts a hole in the wall, right? And just never calls you or doesn't fix it themselves. And the vouchers, the guy inspecting it comes through and says, "Well, guess what? You're going to lose your voucher payment this month because there's a hole in the wall." That goes back to making sure you inspect those units and take a look at them because look, it's important. I mean, you gotta know what you own. So.
And I will say that one of the benefits of focusing on housing authority tenants, we got to where we knew the only couple guys, and it was guys, I don't think there were any gals, that were going to come and look at our units. So by the relationship being strong with my property manager and the housing authority property inspector, because you can lose weeks quickly. You might lose a tenant, and before you know it, they're like, well, this window doesn't crank open. Where's the screen here? We don't think this air conditioning is working properly. Sometimes the concerns are valid. Sometimes, in my personal opinion, they're BS. So, but where you can work through that is when my property manager had like 20 of these running with the inspector, and we did a good job, and we did everything we said we would do on their punch list. Before you know it, and maybe I shouldn't say this, they were like texting photos. They, meaning the housing authority inspector and my property manager, were like texting some photos back and forth. We were getting things done, and Chris is probably like, don't say that, Brown. But my point is, like, you get better as an operator and you build these relationships. And if it were me advising the audience thinking about doing Section 8 or HUD voucher tenants, I would probably not just you might do one just to learn, but you probably want to do them at scale and scope because the headache, it's not incremental. Once you've already absorbed the headache of having one or two, and by headache, I mean working with the housing authority, the applications, the transfer deposit slips, the inspections, and blah, blah, blah. You might as well do like 50 of them or however many you have an appetite for, because you're really going to, now you're going to benefit from all that labor that you front loaded, and here comes the direct deposits, and you'll just be a better operator.
Yeah.
So, well, Chris, the another area of expertise you have, and I don't want to run too long, but could you touch a little bit on two topics? You can pick which one you go first. Syndications are on a lot of people's mind. The big non-recourse loans that we touched on maybe 40 minutes ago, you can't get them for these little onesie-twosie deals. So a lot of people that might own a couple of rentals are thinking, I want to springboard into 100-unit plus deals with syndications and non-recourse money, with general partnerships and limited partnerships and waterfalls. I know it's a topic we could run like hours on, but it's kind of like the common mistakes or pitfalls. When you have a client, let's say I called you and I'm like, Chris, Yield Coach Capital, we're ready to syndicate. What would be kind of some of like your cautionary tales, or how would you vet me out a little bit?
The first thing I tell anybody is, whatever you do, please don't sign any term sheets until you talk with a lawyer. And yeah, I am a lawyer, but I can tell you I've gotten myself into situations where I use this phrase all the time. A lawyer that has himself as a client is a fool. And I was a fool, man. I did this one time where I'm like, I got this. I'll sign this term sheet. I understand it all, and get into the term sheet, and then you start looking through, and it's like, oh, crap, I didn't think of that, or what about this, or anything else. The biggest thing when you try to start syndicating your deal, and like, I got someone that wants to do this with me, right? I'm going to leap. Exactly. I'm going to springboard. It's like, just take the time, have somebody look at that term sheet from a different perspective. Lawyer, accountant, business partner. Don't just sign it, right? Because once you sign the term sheet, man, I mean, look, your syndicating partner, your limited partner, your quiet capital, your quiet cash, right? They're going to hold you to it. I mean, their expectation is, hey, that was the deal we agreed to, so don't try and retrade me. I mean, to your point, I mean, when you're the general partner in a limited partnership structure, right, meaning you're the guy that's going to run the deal but bringing less cash to the deal, presumably, they're going to expect you to live up to the deal that you agreed to. And guess what? If you don't, they'll just say no. They can go place that cash in 6-10 different places. So first thing is you got to just have a term sheet and get it negotiated. The second thing I'll tell people is sign the term sheet. Once it's done, don't just say, okay, we're done with the term sheet, let's go to documents. Like, no, pause for a second, sign the term sheet, get that signature, on ink and move forward from there. I can't tell you how many times that I've gotten term sheets that aren't signed and they tell me it's final. And I'm like, are you sure it's final? Where's the signed version? Oh, we don't need one. We get 60% of the way through negotiating the syndication documents. We hit a snag and they're like, well, that's not what the term sheet says. And the other group says, well, that wasn't the final term sheet. It's like, oh, come on. Like, please. Around the structuring of these things, they can be as simple as, one agreement, a joint venture operating agreement. They can be as complex as, I've got one that I'm working on right now that is probably a combination of 8 or 10 different ventures that all roll up into a holding company. So they can get as complicated as quickly as you want. It's not for the faint of heart, right? There's a lot that goes into this. There is pursuit capital that you're going to have to spend, right? The lawyers don't work for free. The diligence parties that you have to engage don't work for free. But I'll tell you that for me, that was the leap. Like, that's where I have gotten to with my, investment career. That's where I want to be, and it's kind of nice because once you find one or two of these bigger syndicators and you do a good job for them, it's rinse and repeat. Kind of like what you said about the Section 8, and the bringing on the vouchers. Same kind of concept. You find one or two of these guys, set it up right the first time, spend the money up front to set it up right, and then it's rinse and repeat. They're just going to keep. If you do a good job, why would they move their money somewhere else, right? It's easier for them. It's easier for you. So that was always the goal for me. I am, I won't say I'm there. I'm not doing this full time for a living yet. But certainly I'm, doing these types of deals, and that's the dream, right? I've got, limited partners who, are aware of what's going on. They give me their cash, and we've built a rapport and a trust relationship where, it's very nice. It's now when I find a deal, I can send out a relatively small list of my syndicators, and within a few days, it's funded. I mean, that's a great feeling to have. But you got to take time to set it up. It takes, time to set it up, understand the documents, and quite frankly, build the trust in the relationship with them. So,
you pretty much answered my both questions in that answer, which was great because it was syndication and raising capital. Let's stick high level instead of moving around. Of course, some people can pull friends and family money, but let's leave that alone. A more sophisticated syndication, you said you can put out correspondence to a limited group and fund your opportunities. Obviously, these people know you. They're probably repeat. And what better way to show them you're good at this by paying them back on a deal and have them fund the second, the third, the fourth. I mean, the track record is everything. But let's say somebody doesn't have a track record working with outside money. What would you say as far as some tips on raising private capital? Let's just use your example. It's going to be a syndication, and you're going to put out term sheets. They've never done a deal with you. Do you have any advice on kind of finding limited partners and anything you could say on that?
Yeah. So I think a lot of the first thing I would say is stay within your network to start, right? I've seen groups that and individuals that said, you know what, I'm going to go out and I'm going to buy a list of 10,000 limited partners and I'm going to blast everything out. Good luck. I mean, you need a staff of 20 to wade through that and process it and vet them and everything else. So first thing I said is, look, if you want to buy a house, and turn around and flip it, maybe you go to, and you can't do it all yourself, you go to your friends, with brother, sister, mom, dad, aunts, uncles, friends from college, friends from elementary school, and say, hey, I think I'm going to do, this deal, if you want to invest with me, I can give you 10% on your money, 8% on your money, whatever. And start from there, right? Because normally what ends up happening is you start from there. Next thing you know, you get one or two of those people that are interested. They tell people, hey, this really worked out well for me. I invested, making up a number, $10,000, and 12 to 18 months later, I got $11,000 or $12,000 back. That's a good good return on your money for a 1 to 2 year term. And it starts to build, and it starts to snowball, right? For the folks that, again, there's been people that I know that have been successful saying, I'm in, and I'm just going to, blow it out there and hope that people respond. They hit. Some of them hit. Some of them don't. But I think having that base level, which, you know well enough that if something does go wrong, it's not comfortable, but you're not uncomfortable calling them saying, hey, look, we got a problem, right? Mm-hmm. The first deal I ever had that went south, and I joke, if you've never had a deal go south, it's like, maybe you're not really a real estate investor. I'm just kidding. I mean, you hope it never goes south. But the first one I had to go south, I actually had some friends in, and it's like, crap, man. Like, we ended up losing like 20% of our invested capital. It was not a good deal, but it was way better. One, being open and transparent with them. Two, them being people that I knew, trusted, and they, had an inherent trust level in me to believe that, look, we've done everything we can. It's just, it was a bad investment, right? It didn't pan out the way we thought it was. Learning those lessons with people that you have a pre-existing relationship with and learning how to deal with those lessons you have a pre-existing relationship with is going to be a heck of a lot better than trying to walk into a room with the guy that's got 30, 50, 80, $100 million and explain to him why you lost 10 of it. And having those experiences and being able to talk through it also gives you the ability to say, hey, listen, that deal that went south, I now know that there were red flags along the way. When I did a debrief on this deal, I now know, hey, when these things start to happen, I need to get out in front of this, as opposed to just, well, let's wait and see what happens, right? And you learn those things. So there's a whole host of why I believe starting with that base level investor and kind of building your network up is important.
That was a really good answer, Chris. Just to use like a parallel here, so like to use Chris's principles, let's say we wanted to apply it. Take your sphere of influence. Hey, you want to have a damn good deal, because as Chris said, when you start, you're probably going to be pulling money from like the tight core inner rings of your sphere of influence. These are people you probably have to see at like, Thanksgiving or God forbid every day or at the workplace. You do not want to put them in a bad deal. You want to treat their money like it's superior to yours, and I think that's a good mindset. Obviously, Chris, I thank you for talking about a deal that didn't pan out. You're right. Everybody that's a long investor in real estate, you're going to have certain things that miss projections. You might have to do a capital call or not be able to return all the capital, and these are not good scenarios, but these are also reasons why you want to have quality deals. Don't just, and I think Chris can probably agree, some people are money first, deal second. I tend to be a little more deal first. And what I mean by that is I've got to have an investable deal before I ever bother anybody. Now, it's chicken or the egg. There's two schools of thought, but there's a risk, in my opinion, and I've been disagreed with. If I go out and I lather up all these investors and let's say there's $10 million ready to go, we can leverage it into $40, $50 million worth of real estate purchases. It is so tempting for the syndicator general partner to run out there and just start going on a buying spree without enough prudence, because the tail is wagging the dog, the capital is like wagging the capital group. And so, to Chris's point, a better approach, start a little smaller, use your core sphere of influence, good deal, and now you're building a track record. Don't go take big, mean, multi-million-dollar strangers' money that are going to sue you when you fail. It's not a good way to start.
Yeah. And just one more point on that, Ian, is to say that when I first started investing, I made it my principal core of one of my investings that I was going to take what I call a first loss position, right? So before anybody else lost money, I had to lose all of my investment first to make sure that I returned my partner's capital, because to your point, and I think you said this earlier and I couldn't agree more, I treat my investors' money as if it's worth more. It is worth more than my money, right? Because they've placed their confidence in me, they've placed their faith in me, they have placed their expectations in me, and I've become, the purveyor and the guardian of that cash. And that just carries a higher threshold than my money. So, making sure you understand what that first loss position means and what it could do to you, and then making sure, quite honestly, to your point, that the temptation isn't there to say, oh, well, I thought I'd do first loss, but how about we split it equally, right? You you can't waffle on your principles here because that will get you sued.
Hmm. I really hope people get all the way to the end of this show because there's so much quality content, Chris. I really do appreciate it. In the sake of time, let's hit just a couple of personal things. What are some hobbies and interests of Chris Walker, the deal machine, Chris?
I joke, I'm a deal junkie, right? I think you are too. Like, if I'm having a lazy Saturday afternoon, I'll be on LoopNet or whatever, like just looking at deals or on the broker website. So I'm a deal junkie. I love playing with software and things like that. When I'm not doing that, love to try and golf. I'm terrible at it. It's absolutely horrible. It's never been good. And then, you've got young kids too, right? You gotta, one of the things that drives my wife crazy, which I admit I'm horrible at and need to be better at, and I'm trying, she says I've gotten somewhat better, is you gotta have that work-life balance. I laugh. Like, I'm not sure that actually exists. I think it's like a wishful phenomenon that we all hope exists one day. But, you got to make time to just turn it off, right? Because in real estate, I mean, you could make it so that it never ends. And you just keep going and going and going. But, you just got to take a minute, take a step back, turn it off, and just kind of relax a little. Which, trust me, to your point earlier, being a Northeasterner, Pittsburgher, and then New Yorker, it's like that doesn't come naturally.
No, it doesn't. Yeah, I don't see you like in a rocking chair sipping a mint julep, nice and slow. No,
I might be sipping a mint julep, but I'm probably underwriting a deal.
yeah, exactly. Scrolling deals. Any resources? I do hope that people reach out to you if they're considering getting into like the affordable housing or syndicating a deal. Chris is a great resource. He would be my first call on a formal syndication. He can get all your documents in order. But resources outside of you and your firm that you would say are worthwhile, like maybe to be more specific, any like investment or business books that had an influence on you?
So some great books. Just kind of give you some ideas is that I've read is The 4-Hour Work Week. I don't necessarily agree with all the principles in there, but I think it gives some context that has nothing to do with real estate per se. One of my favorite resources is the multifamily websites and things like that, where it's a click in the morning, right? You're having a cup of coffee, just click on something, read one article, right? Another place that I love, Novogradac, one of the preeminent real estate appraisal / consulting firms in the U.S. Tons of free information out there. Highly encourage it. And then, one of the things that I think is just, is beholden to real estate investors is, like I said before, which is why I keep doing it, is you just got to put in the time. You got to grind, right? You got to be willing to underwrite that deal on a Saturday when you're tired, because that could be the deal, right? That could be the deal. It does. It can take your toll on folks, but you got to be willing to put in the time. For what it's worth, man, I use, all sorts I've tried dozens of different investment models, anything from Excel to the online. You got to find what works for you. Just accessing those resources, making sure you take the time to read it and digest it. And, I wouldn't recommend trying to do it all in a day. It won't work. But just being out there and touching on those things. So.
Chris, you are really good at answering like 3 of my planned questions at once. So I was going to say, what is the single biggest kind of coaching point you could impart on the audience? But it sounds like doing that extra 20%, like that extra half day or day a week, where that's the kind of the separating piece, because a lot of people are willing to throw a little bit of time and stuff, see where it goes, but to really commit, and you said the extra grind. But if you do have something in addition, but I totally agree that can be the separating feature.
Yeah, I think that is a separator. I tell people all the time, my family and friends are like, what would you say to somebody that really wants to get into this, right? And I tell people all the time, I'm like, there are people smarter than me. There are people better financed than me. There are people with more money, better connections than me. But I will never let someone outwork me. And at the end of the day, I truly believe that if you're going to be a successful real estate investor, you got to be able to work. Maybe somebody works as hard as you, but they'll never outwork you. And that's key. And I think that sets precedent for your investors. They see that. I think it sets precedents for your banks. They see that. I think it sets precedent for, quite frankly, your own personal life, putting in that extra 5, 7, 10, 20%. So, that's one of my favorites is you can do many things, but you won't outwork me.
I love that. Even as I branded this platform, the Yield Coach, obviously we have this athletic theme. Even those that didn't come up through athletics, you had to at least get through PE in school. I mean, but like you've got to grind at times, and kind of taking like the athletic analogies, running those suicide sprints, hitting the weights at 6 a.m. or doing the 2-a-days. Even if you didn't do sports, you kind of get it. And don't think just because the pursuit is entrepreneurial that it's going to be easy. I do love the expression simple, not easy. And that's really what this is. Is it complex? After a few years, you won't see it as complex, but it doesn't mean it becomes easy. So simple, not easy.
Yep. Love it.
All right, Chris, where can people find you? We will have your formal contact in the show notes, but if you want to, speak in the easiest way people can reach out to you.
Yeah, look, feel free to reach out to me. My law firm's website is www.lippes.com. That's LIPPES.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, Christopher Walker. Would be thrilled, if people want to reach out, talk to me, have a cup of coffee, whether it's in person via Zoom. Obviously friend of you as well. Anybody that knows you and friend of you, friend of mine, your subscribers, your folks that you're working with. So would be thrilled to help out. Like I said, this is, I love it. It's fun. It's what I like to do. So happy to help people along the way.
Wonderful. All right, and I do recommend you guys take Chris up on that offer. He's a great resource. Be sure to, if you're listening, be sure to look on the Yield Coach Instagram for updates. So we're going to let some people fire in questions that we might answer in the future. So please DM us or message us questions. You can email me. It's Ian, IAN, @yield-coach.com. And this will be on YouTube, Spotify, Google, iTunes podcast. And when this episode launches, when you see it, please go ahead and subscribe to follow. Give us that 5-star review. Help us grow. And we'll keep you posted on exciting content to come. But for that, we're going to call it a wrap. And this is Coach Brown telling you to lace up and leave it all on the field. Yield Coach out.